It was January 11th, 1944. Deep over Germany, a single American pilot in a P-51 Mustang made a decision that would change the air war forever. Separated from his squadron and low on ammunition, he looked up and saw 30 German fighters tearing into a formation of B-17 bombers. Instead of turning back, he attacked alone. What happened next earned him the Medal of Honor and convinced the Luftwaffe that their days of controlling German airspace were over. This is the story of when Germany's best fighter pilots first faced the P-51 Mustang, told in their own words about what it was like. For the first 2 years of the American bombing campaign over Europe, the Luftwaffe had a simple and brutally effective strategy: wait. American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings could only escort bombers to the German border, perhaps 400 miles from England, before they had to turn back or risk running out of fuel. So German fighter pilots would hold their formations back, conserve their energy, let those American escorts turn for home, and then pounce on the undefended bomber streams over the target. It was, to put it bluntly, a slaughter. B-17 and B-24 crews were suffering catastrophic losses, 10, 15, even 20% on a single mission. 1 in 5 bombers never came home. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe aces were racking up kills like it was target practice. But in December 1943, something arrived in England that would change everything: a fighter with a British Rolls-Royce engine in an American airframe. A true Allied achievement that blended British engineering with American manufacturing, creating a fighter that could fly farther, faster, and hit harder than anything the Luftwaffe had ever seen. The P-51 Mustang had arrived, and German pilots were about to face an unprecedented challenge. Let's talk about the 354th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group. They were the first to fly the Mustang operationally in combat. Their first mission came on December 1st, 1943, a simple fighter sweep over Belgium to get familiar with the aircraft. No contact with the enemy. But on December 13th, everything changed. 49 P-51 Mustangs from the 354th took off from England and did something never done before. They escorted heavy bombers all the way to Kiel, Germany, deep inside the Reich. The Luftwaffe scrambled dozens of fighters to intercept, expecting the American escorts to peel off and head home like they always did. Except they didn't. The P-51s kept coming, and when the German fighters attacked, the Mustangs tore into them. In that single engagement, those 49 P-51s shot down 15 German aircraft, and not one Mustang was lost. Brand new pilots in a brand new aircraft, facing experienced Luftwaffe veterans, and they didn't lose a single plane. German commanders sent frantic reports. American fighters at 4 to 100 miles penetration. Repeat, American fighters at 4 to 100 miles. High Command thought it was a navigation error. It had to be. No Allied fighter had the range to fly that deep, fight, and still return home. But it wasn't an error. With drop tanks, the Mustang had a combat radius of over 750 miles. Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, was now within range, and there was nowhere left for the Luftwaffe to hide. Before the P-51 arrived, the average bomber loss rate over Germany was 5 to 7%. After the Mustang began deep escort missions, losses dropped below 2%. The bomber crews knew it. The Luftwaffe knew it. The balance of power had shifted. Now let's talk about Major James Howard of the 356th Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group. A former Flying Tiger who had already fought in China, Howard was an experienced, cool-headed combat pilot. And on January 11th, 1944, he did something so audacious that it became legendary. That day he led 50 P-51 Mustangs, escorting 3 divisions of B-17 Flying Fortresses on a raid against Oschersleben, about 100 miles southwest of Berlin, home to critical aircraft factories. The bomber stream was enormous, over 600 B-17s and B-24s, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. As the bombers finished their run and turned for home, German fighters struck in waves. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, Messerschmitt 109s, scores of them from all angles. Howard's squadron was supposed to cover another bomber group, but when he saw the 401st Bomb Group being mauled by about 30 German fighters, he made a split-second decision. He radioed his men to engage and dove straight into the middle of the furball. What followed became one of the most remarkable dogfights in aviation history. Howard was separated from his squadron almost immediately in the chaos. Suddenly, it was one P-51 against 30 German fighters. Below him, hundreds of American bomber crews faced annihilation unless someone stopped the attack, so Howard fought alone for 30 minutes. He dove through enemy formations, firing at fighters closing on the bombers. Witnesses claimed he even appeared to ram a German plane when his guns ran dry, though that detail was never confirmed. He used every ounce of skill and courage to keep the Luftwaffe away from the bombers. When he finally limped back to base with empty tanks and no ammunition, bomber crews were shouting over their radios, "Who was that guy? Who was that P-51 pilot?" No one knew until days later when the Air Force identified him as Major James Howard. He became known as the One-Man Air Force and earned the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that decoration for air-to-air combat. But the psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was even greater. Word spread quickly. There was a new American fighter in the sky, and its pilots would not back down. So now we come to the heart of the story. What did Germany's best fighter pilots actually think about the P-51 Mustang? First, let's clear up a common myth. You've probably heard the famous story about Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top aces with 104 confirmed kills. The story goes that Hermann Göring once asked him what he needed to win the war, and Galland replied, "A squadron of Spitfires." That story is true, but it happened in September 1940, during the Battle of Britain, 3 full years before the P-51 appeared over Europe. Galland wasn't admitting that the Spitfire was superior to German fighters. He was making a sarcastic tactical point. German Messerschmitt Bf-109s were designed for offensive missions, fast, powerful, ideal for diving attacks. But Göring was forcing them to fly close escort for bombers, which negated their advantages. So Galland joked that if Göring insisted on such defensive missions, he might as well give them Spitfires. In truth, Galland preferred the Bf-109. But when he first faced the P-51 Mustang in late 1943 and early 1944, that was something else entirely. Here's what made the P-51 so dangerous from the Luftwaffe's point of view. First, range. With external drop tanks, the Mustang could fly over 1,600 miles, giving it a combat radius of roughly 750 miles. Berlin was only 600 to 100 miles from England. That meant every major city in Germany was now within reach of American fighter escort. There was no turnback point anymore. Second, speed and altitude. The definitive P-51D model, which arrived in spring 1944, could cruise at 440 miles per hour and climb to over 40,000 feet. It could chase or evade almost anything the Luftwaffe had. Late-war German aircraft, such as the Focke-Wulf Ta-152 or the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet, could match those numbers, but Germany simply couldn't produce them in meaningful quantities. Third, endurance. The Mustang could stay in the fight. It had the endurance to loiter over German territory for 30 to 45 minutes, hunting for targets, airfields, transport planes, even training schools. That was what truly terrified German pilots. There was no safety anymore. Johannes Steinhoff, who flew 993 combat missions and survived the war, later called the P-51, the most dangerous opponent the Luftwaffe faced in the West. Gerhard Barkhorn, the third highest scoring ace of all time with 275 victories, said that by mid-1944, encountering P-51s meant German fighter missions were essentially suicide. Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring ace in history with 352 kills, admitted after the war that from 1943 onward, a new German pilot facing a new American pilot in a P-47 or P-51 was a sitting duck. By mid-1944, the United States was sending up 5 to 100, 6 to 100, even 8 to 100 Mustangs on a single mission. The Luftwaffe was hopelessly outnumbered. In 1943, before the Mustang arrived in large numbers, Germany could still trade losses favorably. One German fighter lost for every 4 or 5 Allied bombers destroyed. By July 1944, just 7 months after the P-51 began deep escort operations, that ratio had completely reversed. German fighters were being destroyed at a rate of 3 or 4 to 1. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe managed to fly only 319 sorties over the invasion beaches. The Allies flew more than 14,000. Why? Because for the previous 6 months, P-51s had been hunting them relentlessly, strafing airfields, destroying fuel depots, attacking transport planes, and killing instructors. The Luftwaffe didn't just lose air superiority, it lost the ability to train new pilots or even defend its own air bases. The P-51 wasn't just another fighter. It was the tip of the spear that broke the Luftwaffe's back. Hannes Neuroth, a Luftwaffe ace who wrote one of the most detailed pilot memoirs of the war, recalled that when he first saw large formations of P-51s escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back in early 1944, he knew Germany had lost the air war. Not because the Mustang was unbeatable in a dogfight, it wasn't, but because Germany could never match the numbers, the training, the fuel, or the industrial output behind it. After the war, when former enemies could finally speak candidly, German pilots were remarkably honest. They respected the P-51's engineering, they acknowledged its effectiveness, and most of all, they recognized it as the weapon that ended their ability to defend Germany from the air. So let's answer the question directly. Was the P-51 Mustang the best fighter of the Second World War? In pure performance, no. The German Ta-152 had better high-altitude ability. The Me-262 jet was faster. The Spitfire Mark 14 was more maneuverable. And Japan's Ki-84 was formidable. But here's what the German aces understood. The P-51 was the right fighter at the right time in the right numbers. It was cheap, about $50,000 per aircraft, compared to $85,000 for a P-47. Over 15,000 Mustangs were built, roughly 15 per day, once production hit its stride. It was reliable, maintainable, long-ranged, and it could escort bombers to any target in Germany, hunt fighters over their own airfields, and still make it home. German aces like Hartmann and Barkhorn scored incredible victories, but they knew the truth. They were fighting a losing battle against overwhelming odds. The P-51 didn't win because it was invincible. It won because there were thousands of them, flown by well-trained pilots, backed by limitless resources, and used in a coordinated campaign that Germany couldn't stop. War isn't decided by who has the single best weapon, it's decided by who can produce, deploy, and sustain enough good weapons to overwhelm the enemy. And that's exactly what the P-51 Mustang did. When Luftwaffe aces first faced the Mustang in late 1943 and early 1944, their reactions ranged from shock to fear to grudging respect. They knew immediately that the balance of power had shifted. Men like Galland, Steinhoff, and Hartmann weren't cowards. They were among the best fighter pilots who ever lived, But even they couldn't overcome American industrial power, pilot training, and the technological marvel that was the P-51 Mustang. In their post-war memoirs, letters, and interviews, German fighter pilots said the same thing. The P-51 wasn't just another fighter. It was the fighter that broke our ability to defend Germany from the air. They respected it. They feared it. And deep down, they knew that once it arrived in force, the air war had decisively turned against them. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win dogfights. It won the air war over Europe. And that made all the difference.